So I heard today at lunch that the program is organized in a way that it starts off optimistic about technology and then becomes a little bit more pessimistic and becomes optimistic again. So I think this is the beginning of the pessimistic part of the program. The book that Teresa mentioned is called Geek Heresy, Rescuing Social Change from the Cult of Technology. A geek is somebody who makes a fetish of technical solutions, somebody who overemphasizes technology in various ways. And a heresy, of course, is a religious term. It's the idea that there is a doctrine that goes against the main orthodoxy. And so the question, of course, is what is the orthodoxy that I'm talking about? And I want to talk about several claims by very well-known people and what they say about technology. So this is a quote from Arne Duncan. Here's President Obama. Arne Duncan is the tall man standing next to him. He is the United States Secretary of Education. And he says that technology is a game changer in the field of education, a game changer that we desperately need to both improve achievement for all and increase equity. So he's claiming that technology is a necessary part of improving education, especially in the United States, but certainly elsewhere as well. There are many projects around the world today in which the goal is to use digital technology in some way to assist in education. Many of you may have heard about one laptop per child. That was a project started by MIT Media Lab founder Nicholas Negroponte, and his idea was that in many parts of the world, there are not either good teachers or the teachers are often absent from school. And so his solution was, let's provide every child with a very inexpensive laptop and they will be able to learn on their own. Here's another quote, this one from Hillary Clinton. So she says, access to information helps citizens hold their own governments accountable. What's interesting about her was that when she was Secretary of State of the United States, the protests in Iran happened in 2009, and it looked like for a moment that there was going to be a successful revolution in Iran. And at that time, Twitter was just about to hold some kind of they were going to stop their services for a moment to do regular upgrades, planned upgrades. And because the State Department felt that Twitter was such an important part of the revolution, they actually asked Twitter to postpone the upgrades until some of the action with the protests died down, and Twitter complied. So basically what she's emphasizing here again is that the technologies that we have, the digital technology that we have, the internet and so forth, are somehow in and of themselves contributing to more democracy, to democratization. Okay, so the third example I'm going to give is from a very well-known person from the technology industry, Mark Zuckerberg. And in launching a project that he calls internet.org, he says, the richest 500 million people have way more money than the next 6 billion combined. You solve that by getting everyone online. Okay, so his solution to addressing inequality, one of the two big problems that Yankee mentioned earlier, is to provide internet access for everybody. And this is the claim that he's been making for a while. He's stood behind it despite lots of criticism. And internet.org is proceeding in many different countries on this particular rhetoric. Now, I'm not sure that he necessarily believes it. Internet.org is housed within a department called the Growth Division for Facebook. So that tells you what Facebook's intention is. But the fact that he's willing to make this claim and that there are actually many people who do believe that the internet can help people come out of poverty suggests that he's catering to a certain kind of belief about technology. And what I'm going to try to do is to dispel some of those beliefs. And I should confess that I, at one point, held opinions that were not unlike these expressed here. So I'm a computer scientist by training. I used to work at Microsoft for 12 years. And in 2004, I moved to India to help start a research lab where the goal was to use digital technologies in different ways to address poverty, the problems of poverty in that country. So we used everything from personal computers, mobile phones, digital cameras. Sometimes we designed our own custom hardware, different uses of the internet, all to alleviate problems in healthcare, governance, microcredit, education, agriculture, and so forth. And one of the things I discovered when I was in India is because it's such an extreme world, very different from the one that I was used to in the United States, and I'll give you a demonstration of that. This is the lab that I used to work in, and we regularly had farm animals walk in front of the lab. Inside, there were many people who with computer science PhDs who were working on computer science problems. And what's interesting about going to an extreme situation that has a lot of different contexts and different uses of technology is that you begin to see that your own personal idea of technology does not is not necessarily the right one. It's like holding a Newtonian idea of physics when in fact an Einsteinian world of physics is out there as long as you're willing to go to the extremes. So as I mentioned, we ran lots of different projects, and over my little over 5 years there, we probably did about 50 different research projects in which different kinds of digital technology were used in some way to help address poverty. This is an example of showing a series of videos to a farmer in a very rural part of India. And the people that we were trying to help were often extremely poor, people who lived on less than $1 per day. Many of them did not have a significant education. People like this farmer here were not literate, so they could not read. And so we did everything we could to bring the technology to them. We worked on what were called text-free user interfaces so that people who couldn't read could understand content online, and so on and so forth. And ultimately what I found was that while many of our projects worked in a research context, they did not ultimately work when we tried to roll them out for wider dissemination. And if there's one way in which I can explain the difference between the projects that had some impact and those that did not, it was basically up to who we partnered with. So if our partners were very devoted, capable organizations, either NGOs or government departments, then the technology that we provided could help and often had some kind of impact. On the other hand, if those organizations were either not necessarily focused on positive impact or were somehow dysfunctional or fundamentally inefficient, then it did not make a difference how good our technology was. It didn't make a difference how well designed the technology was. It didn't matter how closely we worked with them to design the right technology. Ultimately, that technology did not have impact. And so when I went back to the United States, I found instance after instance where even though I had this belief that more technology tends to help the world, that was not the true even in the context of a very different country in the United States. So in 2012, I volunteered for a nonprofit in the Seattle area, and the goal was to teach 3rd through 5th graders something about computer literacy and computer programming. So we had projects in robotics, we helped them create their own videos and so on. And what I found consistently was that the biggest obstacle to teaching young children about technology was the technology. So every time I turned around in the classroom, the kids would find video games to play. You know, sometimes we would disable the internet, they would find the video games that were already installed on the computer and so on and so forth. I'm sure many of you have seen children playing with their parents' smartphones. If you look at them carefully, they are not doing math problems, they are not writing papers, they are playing video games, they're playing Angry Birds. And so the idea that this technology, which is amazingly good at distracting children from educational things, as the solution to education is fundamentally very strange. In fact, there are studies now that show very rigorously, randomized control trials that show that if you provide children with a laptop versus comparing them with a control group that doesn't have laptops, that the children with the laptops gain nothing in terms of their test scores, in terms of their grades, in terms of their attendance at school, in terms of disciplinary actions and so forth. In other words, nothing that's measurable as education is improved because they own laptops. And if you look at what they do with the laptops instead, you find again they're playing video games, they are using social media, and so on. What about politics? So, you know, oftentimes we hear about how the Egyptian revolution was a Facebook revolution. And especially in the United States, there was a lot of media coverage that suggested that the revolution in Egypt happened because of social media. The interesting thing with that idea is that it didn't work in other countries. So for example, in Bahrain, as well as in Saudi Arabia, there were many people who tried to plan similar kinds of protests in those countries on Facebook, on Twitter, on their websites, and they did not even register in the international news. And primarily that was because in those countries, existing civil society is basically stunted. It does not exist because the monarchies in those countries suppress any attempt by people to actually organize into effective groups. In contrast, in Egypt, there was very active Muslim Brotherhood, there are active trade unions, there are women's groups, there are student groups, and all of these groups actually used their organizational capacity and then used Facebook in addition to bring people out to the street. And so that combination of a strong civil society together with the technology is ultimately what enabled the Egyptian revolution to happen. Finally, we have evidence from other revolutions that you can have very successful revolutions without the internet. Of course, there's examples in this area, and even in the United States where we talk about these revolutions, of course, there was no internet in 1775 or 1776. I often say that if we're going to call the Egyptian revolution a Facebook revolution, we should call the American revolution a lantern revolution, because there's a famous story about Paul Revere using lanterns to signal when the British were coming. Finally, what about inequality? So oftentimes you'll hear that the internet democratizes things and that it provides a level playing field so that everybody can have the same advantages as everybody else. Well, here is a graph of the US rate of poverty from about 1960 through 2008. And actually, if you extend this a little bit further, this line goes up because since the financial crisis, the poverty rate has increased. Now, during the same 40, 45 years, we have seen an explosion of digital technologies. Okay? So what's interesting about this is that the poverty rate has not basically changed since 1970. In the United States, poverty declined from 1940 to about 1970, and then since then has stayed level. So if you believe that technology in some way automatically addresses deep social problems, then the United States itself is a counterexample to that idea. Okay, so this is a country that arguably is the most technologically advanced country in the world. I live near Detroit, where there are very, very poor people in the United States who, they don't have jobs, but they have a smartphone. They have access to the internet. Okay, they are not getting any richer because they have a smartphone. If you believe that technology is the answer to some of these problems, then the United States shows that even in a country with an amazing amount of technology, that went through a golden age of innovation, that it was not enough to change the situation with respect to poverty. Inequality in the United States has increased during the same amount of time. Social mobility has decreased. And I'm not suggesting that the technology is responsible for these things, but I do believe that in the United States overall, the country is not focused on eliminating inequality or poverty. And as a result, no amount of technology addresses those issues either. So one question about all these things is that, for most of us, we have very positive experiences with technology. I'm going to expect that almost everybody in this room already has a smartphone. Is that right? Can I see a show of hands? Smartphone owners? Yes. And in any case, you have good access to the internet or to mobile telephony at some point. And I'm guessing that also that you have benefited from it, that you believe that it has improved your life in some way. So how is it possible that so many people can have their lives improved by the internet, and yet so many other people do not see a measurable value from it? And I believe there's a very simple explanation, and it is the following. That basically, technology's impact is to amplify underlying human forces. Okay, so where those human forces are already positive, technology will help make them even more positive, right? All of you have a very good education. You have a certain amount of social status. There's a good chance that you have friends who can help you in situations where, in any kind of help that you need. And so your ability to communicate with those people better, your ability to take advantage of your education helps you do things that you would not otherwise be able to do with the technology. And that's a net positive. But that's because it's amplifying that underlying capacity that you have. In India, what I found was that if you don't have that education, if you don't have those political connections, if you are already marginalized by the society that you live in, then it doesn't make a difference how much of this technology you get, because you have zero power to amplify. And so it doesn't help you in the end. I also saw instances in which there was already embedded, deeply entrenched corruption. And in the cases where the government is corrupt and has no fundamental interest in changing that situation, then it doesn't make a difference how many tools for government transparency, how many digital ways of showing accountability happen. The fundamental problems of corruption don't go away. In fact, there's a very well-known website in India called IPaidAbribe.com, in which people who pay bribes submit the fact that they paid a bribe as a way to shame the government into becoming less corrupt. Well, this project has been in existence now for, I believe, over 6 years. And really, government corruption in that country has not yet declined that much. And that's because the reality is everybody already knows that corruption is happening. And people in government know that corruption is happening. And people in the government benefit from that corruption. So they're not about to change just because a few people have decided that they're going to advertise the fact that the government is corrupt. So what does this mean ultimately? Basically, what it comes down to is that the technology is getting better and better and better, but whether it gets put to a good use or a bad use still depends on all of us, on human beings, on individuals, and on society as a whole. And the way I think about it is that it's a little bit like driving a car. So the technology is the engine, and the engine is getting better and better and better, which means you can go to places faster, and that's good in some ways, but in and of itself, it doesn't guarantee that you will reach the destination or that you will reach the destination alive. Those other things which I think are more important actually depend on who is driving the car, or in a day when we might end up with self-driving cars, who is punching in the destination and what priorities they're giving for the automated driver. And all of those questions will remain human, at least for the time being. One day we may end up with computer overlords that make decisions on their own, but that's another topic that I'm going to hit in the next slide. So what does this mean overall for those of us who are interested in technology? I believe it means that if you're interested in using technology for positive ends, you have to find either a positive social trend or an existing organization that is doing good things and use the technology to amplify those forces. And every use of technology in which there's a positive outcome, from what I've seen, it's because there's already an existing base of positive forces, positive human forces to amplify. And what about for the rest of us who may or may not be interested in technology? Let me tell you a story about this group of students that I met in India. This woman's name is Tara Srinivasa. She currently works at Ernst & Young, which is a global accounting and consulting firm. When I met her, she was in high school, and she said that she liked accounting, she wanted to go into business, and she played basketball and badminton in the afternoons. It doesn't sound like she has a very unusual life, except that every one of these students in this picture grew up initially, they were born to families in very poor rural India. Many of their households did not even earn $1 per day. So they were born into very poor conditions. And what changed their life was a particular school called Shanti Bhavan, which was basically a boarding school in which the school almost adopted these children and then took them from a very regular kind of school, but a good school, from the age of 4 until they graduated, and then also sent them to college. So this is the value of an incredibly good, solid education. And even though there were not a lot of computers at the school, some of these kids are now software engineers. So what I want to emphasize is that again, in a world in which there's a lot of technology, one of the best things that we can do is make sure that everybody has the education and the ability to make use of that technology in a productive way. Finally, since we're kind of co-sponsored by a DOKU Fest, I'm going to mention 2 movies. It seems like there are a lot of movie references today. So one on the left is, of course, The Matrix. And earlier I saw that almost everybody in the audience has seen that movie. On the right, this is from Star Trek: The Next Generation. So I believe these worlds of science fiction project 2 potential futures for the human race in context of very advanced technology. So Facebook, of course, has a very dark message. And I believe we are already in the process of inching closer to that world. Okay, so here's how I'm going to show that. So in The Matrix, this is a movie in which an advanced technology harvests human energy to feed its machine masters, all while giving human beings the illusion of a pleasant life. Okay? Now I'm going to suggest that all of us are already participating in something like this already, and it's called Facebook. Okay? This is an advanced technology that harvests human attention to feed shareholders while offering illusions of pleasant relationships. So the advice I have for all of you is take the red pill. Now, of course, Facebook is reasonably innocuous. Okay, this is at this point, maybe you spend a few minutes every day online on Facebook. It's not a huge draw on your attention, but make no mistake, you are not the customer for Facebook. The customer are the paying advertisers, and Facebook's algorithms are optimized so that you are more likely to see the ads they want you to see, and that you're more likely to click on those ads. Now, imagine, in the very near future, we heard some of the futurists talking about artificial intelligence. Right now, Facebook is designed by human beings, and they're limited by the intelligence of human beings and how creative they can be in ensuring that you stay online, right? One of Facebook's goals, because it increases their revenue, is to keep you on Facebook, on the platform, for as long as possible. Okay, well, one day it's possible that we will have machines that are smarter than human beings, whose goal is to increase Facebook shareholder value. And they will get better and better and better at keeping you glued to the screen, and if you go to an advertiser's page, to pay money for things that you don't need. Okay? And so that's one possible world. And the reason why this world is possible is because we are about to, I believe, enter in a phase where the artificial intelligence of the world is going to be like an atomic bomb of digital technology. It's going to make every technology we have so far seem like toy guns. And the question is, who is going to have control of that power? So the interesting thing with atomic technology is that so far it has always been in the hands of governments which are reasonably sane, right? And so we have not actually seen the negative use of these very powerful weapons. We are now about to go into a phase where private companies who do not owe anything to the general public, except for those who own their shares, are eventually going to have the equivalent kind of power in the digital realm. And so do we really want to give up that kind of power? And I think one of the problems with the world in general is that we do not know how to rein in the power of very powerful corporations. They are not accountable to the general public. Now, the other world that's possible is the next generation world, in which Jean-Luc Picard says the acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. Now, in Star Trek, sometimes they pretend that this is because of abundant technology, but we already know that, for example, with abundant food technology, we are not yet living in a world in which that food is distributed in a way that everybody can eat. There are still 800 million people in the world who go to bed hungry every night. They're malnourished, and this is in spite of the fact that our present amount of food in the world is actually more than enough to feed everybody and provide a healthy nutrition. And so the fundamental thing that's missing is not the technology. It is our social will, the political will, to make sure that these technologies get used in the right way, and towards fairness, towards justice, towards better governance, and so forth. And so what I'm going to suggest is that especially in a world with abundant technology, especially in a world that we are about to go into, which will have even more powerful technologies, that the most important thing is that we get the social, human, cultural, political, economic conditions correct. And that requires all of us as human beings to participate as citizens, not just as technology users and technology consumers. So with that, I will end. Thank you very much.